In this video, we are going to create an environmental hazard for our 2D game. We're going to make the player die when the player touches lava. In the previous video, we created our player object and gave the player some basic logic. So, uh, you would think that we could use maybe the collision lava to cause the player to die, but that actually will not work. The reason for that is because when you collide with two objects and you use a material as the collision trigger, it will detect if that object has that material anywhere on it. So since the lava is part of the ground, since the ground has the lava texture applied to it, it will trigger the uh, collision automatically whenever the player touches the ground, wherever the player is. So what we have to do is create a hitbox for the lava. So the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to add a mesh cube. I'm going to drag this GX to about the middle of the lava, and then I'm going to scale it along the lava so that it covers up the lava here. And then I'll maybe grab Z and move this down a little bit. All right. So if I tab or press numpad 0 and get out of this and press play, this is what my hitbox looks like right now. So in order to do this hitbox, I'm going to go to my physics tab. I'm going to select two properties here. I'm going to make it a ghost, which means my player can go through it. I'm going to make it invisible, which means that it won't show up. Next, I'm going to go to the Materials tab, and I'm going to give it a material. So I'm going to say lava hitbox. And it doesn't matter what this material looks like because it's invisible. We're just going to use this for our collision. All right. So now I'm going to add in a new property, is alive, for my player. So I selected my player. I came down to my Logic Bricks editor and I added a game property. I'm going to call that property is alive. And I'm going to set that as a Boolean, which is true or false, yes or no. So my player always starts out as alive, so I'm going to click the checkbox to indicate that my player is alive. And I'm going to add a collision here. I'm going to say if, I'll just call it lava, but underneath materials and properties, I'm going to switch it to materials. If I collide with the lava hitbox, then what I'm going to do is set the property of is alive to false. So I'm actually going to call it is dead, or I'll call it set dead. Set dead. Is alive is our property, and a value is going to be false, capital F-A-L-S-E. Add my AND controller in here and link those up. Now initially when I jump down here, it's not going to appear that anything happened. So we actually have to make things happen when the player is no longer alive. So in order to do that, I'm going to add a sensor down here for property. I'm going to call that is alive. And is alive is going to check if the property is alive is equal to true. And then we can do some things here. So for instance, we only want the player to be able to move if the player is alive. So we can actually connect these up to our movement blocks and say, okay, if the user presses any of these keys and the user is alive, sorry, the player, then we're allowed to move. If the player is no longer alive, then the player cannot move anymore. So if I press P, come down here, touch the lava, can't move anymore. My player is dead. So this is alive, allows us to specify what happens when the player is alive. We can also specify what happens when the player is dead. So I'm going to add a property and say is dead. Pin down here. I'm going to select my property as live. I'm going to check to see if it equals false. So if the player is dead, I'm going to add another AND controller. Then I want to restart the scene. I want to start over. I'm going to add a scene actuator and set that to restart. So if the player dies, then we want to restart. This does like an instantaneous restart. All right, so that is our environmental hazard. Thanks for watching and happy blending.